while Maryanne is making that technology happen.
Well, actually, to vamp before you vamp, if you look into the TTRPG book content preview,
Yeah.
it has a couple resources for you that we're going to use tonight. The EDU RPG worksheet and our gaming the systems conceptual matrix. And so there's links there, and there's also a little QR code. And so those are the same things. I just wanted to give it to you in a couple different formats. So we'll have those, and you can follow along at home or not. They're there for you at any time. Okay, vamp away, dear.
All right, so basically the elevator pitch of this whole thing is we have created in the process of creating a way by which teachers can plan, design, use, and evaluate effective classroom instruction using tabletop RPG. And we also have a lot of thoughts on sort of games in general, but clearly, given the nature of this particular server, we will be focusing on TTRPGs. We have done quite a bit of work, both together and apart, and with a lot of other colleagues who work in the applied gaming space on how meets goals.
I don't think this is going to take 90 minutes. I think it's going to take or less.
Yeah,
I think it's going to take significantly
really
less.
Into or less territory. So the point of C.A.T.S, the C.A.T.S specifically, is sort of think of it like your lesson plan format, but for a tabletop role-playing game where we want to marry the features of effective tabletop game design, adventure design, whatever you want to call it, whether you're going to go off on a limb and make your own system or use something existing and try the time-honored tradition of filing off the serial numbers. We're going to basically talk about how you can plan for that to ensure that your curriculum goals are met, as well as designing an effective fiction for students to access those curricular goals without becoming bogged down in the nitty-gritty.
See, this is why I have her, because she vamps so beautifully. Here are the cheat codes. They're also in, these are the same ones that are in the preview panel. So my esteemed colleague, Jennifer Genova, is here. She's the best. She's a middle school teacher. She's a gaming and education. She's the third half of my brain. Is there anything else you want to say about yourself?
I actually just did DM training with student DMs yesterday using a modified version of this C.A.T.S model.
That's rad.
That was cool. It worked really well.
And I'm Maryanne Cullinan, Flyby. I'm a middle school teacher. Guess what? I just found out that I'm defending my dissertation on November 5th. That's in 6 weeks. I'm so excited. And my dissertation research is about using a role-playing game as pedagogy with special ed extended school year. And I just found out that my students, 10 out of 14 of them, gained ground in mathematics over the summer, which is a great result. So I'm very excited. And I also am one of the, but it's great because you never know. And
it's so much fun. I'm sorry, I just found the soundboard. My apologies.
I didn't know what was happening. I'm sorry.
Feel free to clap at all times. And Garrett and I are sort of running tabletop EDU these days and writing the book. All right, so the very first thing we want to talk about is what this isn't. Our C.A.T.S system, our way of thinking about it, is not about turning your whole class into D&D. You do not have to show up tomorrow in full, period costume, although we encourage you to do that whenever you want. You don't So this does not have to be complicated. This does not have to drive you crazy. It's supposed to make you feel good and excited about teaching and be effective.
I wanna.
We are not, yeah,
I'm so sorry. It is in fact, we are going to actively tell you not to turn your entire class into D&D.
oh my God, please don't turn your class into D&D.
We're gonna actively discourage that.
Because D&D has its own agenda. And we want you to have a laser focus on your curriculum. And the purpose of using a role-playing game with a curriculum is to make the delivery of that curriculum additionally effective. Right? So you're not a bad teacher who should feel bad. You're not going to remake everything you did today. You're not going to even have to be good at anything that's artistic. You'll see one of my little games is like the least artistic thing you've ever seen. You don't have to be a great voice actor. Canva helps a lot if you're not particularly artistic. That's what this is on. It looks much more amazing than I could have made. So the idea is this is supposed to make your life easier and more fun and not stress you out. So what this is an opportunity to apply principles of curriculum design to game design. We want you to think about a lesson or a unit within your larger curriculum that you're going to start with. You might expand it to be a whole quarter. You might expand it to be a whole unit, but it's okay to just start with one lesson. Everything you teach right now is probably not bad, or you would have quit already, right? And we want you to add this in places that it feels like it needs it, not just have it take over everything. And this is a research-backed method of marrying SEL, executive functioning, and academic skill instruction. So when somebody says, "What are you doing?" say that instead of playing games, because it's the same thing. Okay. So very quickly here, I want you to think about what is your hard level content? And by that, I mean the things that you just don't really like to teach that much. So what is your least favorite unit or topic to teach? It's probably the same for your learners, right? If you don't like it, they probably don't either. So put that in your mind. One of mine was dichotomous keys, which is something in science that you use to determine what the species of something that you see in front of you. It's incredibly challenging for 8th graders to wrap their heads around unless you think about it in a different way. But so just think about something that you know you got to teach that you don't love to teach. And that's what you want to start with, not the thing you love to teach, because you're probably already doing a really good job of that one. And so why is it hard? Is it kind of not relevant to them? Is it like kind of too easy? Is it developmentally challenging? Right? So start to think about that. Why don't we love this topic? Because as you make your game, you're going to want to address that. Jennifer, do you want to talk about this for a sec? I feel like I've just talked a lot.
So some of you may be familiar with C.A.T.S in the TTRPG space. So this is a going back to that concept of the elevator pitch. It was developed. It was a wildly popular blog post. We do not lay claim to it as designing it, but adapting it for this particular purpose. It is a good way, we feel, for practitioners to like hone in specifically on what they want to do. Look, we're all nerds here, right? We could all get a Silmarillion and 5 Song of Ice and Fires out of our ideas if we were left to our own devices for too long. But we also all know that teacher in our department at school that doesn't understand that the children no longer really care about risk. So we have to kind of balance that out, and C.A.T.S is a way to help us do that. So the first thing we do see, which is concept, which is what is the fiction in which the students will play the game. Notice how we don't say what is the storyline. This is something that we talked about when I was dealing with my student DMs, is that we want the players to be active. So this is sort of thinking about what does the sandbox look like in which our players will play. Two is really important. That is aim. What are the very specific curriculum and skill goals that this fiction is supposed to teach? And that is really going to be what is driving the design of your game. When we think of tone, you can think of that in terms of like, what is the genre, but also like, what are the potential social emotional pitfalls that this may present for students? So like, if are things supposed to be harsh? Is it more competitive? Is it more collaborative? What might be the stakes for the students within the fiction? You'll find that Maryanne and I lean heavily on humorous depictions of otherwise
Yes.
like horrifying things. Like my kids are in my game that I believe is in here. My students are on a cursed island where they won't be able to leave and come home after a horrifying shipwreck. Like, it's kind of a sarcastic. Yeah, and that sort of works with middle schoolers. You may find if you teach high school that your students can handle something that is a bit more actually dire instead of humorously dire.
Right.
If you're working with elementary schoolers, you may want to not listen to us when we talk about how we design our fiction because there may be tears.
Yes,
and
this is why I
finally-
teach middle school now.
Yeah, yep. And then finally,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry. The subject matter is what is the specific like information that you need them to have in order to play, and sort of what are the potential pitfalls, like do they have enough background knowledge, is there challenging vocabulary, anything like that. All right, Maryanne, go.
Yeah, so that's sort of the overview. There'll be a quiz on this later. There won't. But if you just kind of let this flow over you and sort of learn by osmosis at this time. We're going to talk a lot more about this. So, for example, this is one of the things that we gave you is a worksheet for you to do this yourself. And how do you talk through these? It will be in the book also, sort of in detail how to do this. So C.A.T.S, I actually really like to start. Honestly, I like to start with S and A. It doesn't really matter what order you start in. You want to just make sure you have all of these. So we're going to start with C because it's the one on the left. But feel free to start wherever your brain feels the best. What is the world we're living in? We will give you some suggestions of like sort of time-honored tropes that always seem to work. And a great way to think about it is this sentence here at the bottom. The students need to do blank in order to make blank happen in blank setting. So the little game that I'm going to show you, the students need to do a bunch of math and solve a bunch of math problems in order to save the teacher from being kidnapped by a bad guy with a big mustache in a vaguely fantasy setting. Or another one that I talk about sometimes is the students need to sort mushrooms using a dichotomous key in order to not poison all of the babies in the tiny mouse town, right? Academic skills, and this is really important. What do I actually need kids to know and kind of be, what do I need them to be able to do this? Because you want to be making sure that you're practicing the things you actually are trying to teach. And that's when we say D&D has its own agenda, what we mean is there's already so much sort of gravitas to it, right? It has all these spells you have to learn and all these different races you could be and classes you could be and things like that. And unless that's what you're trying to teach, that's taking away from the teaching that you're trying to do, as you're also trying to shoehorn in all this other stuff. So what do the players actually need to do to learn the thing that you're trying to teach them? And some games are learning games and some games are evaluative games, right? The dichotomous key mouse game I'm talking about is an end of the unit game where you have to save the mouse babies. You already need to know how to do it for that to work. But other games, you're learning how to do it as you go. Tone, it's really important to us before you even start this to take a look at how do your students talk to each other now? What systems are in place to settle disagreements or raise concerns? Do they have practice working as a team? Because if not, you're going to have to teach them how to do this. You can't just throw an RPG at them and hope that they'll all suddenly learn to get along because they are 12. And then we talked a little bit of subject matter, who's playing in what setting, what concepts are we doing, what do they need to know? And this is important. Are there specific mechanics that help highlight the content? More on that. Nope, not more on that. So more on that, actually, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second so I can see your beautiful faces. Hello, friends. So Jennifer and I wrote an article, and oh, hello. Now I can see everybody. Hi. So Jennifer and I wrote an article, which is if you take a look at games that are already made, because we're big fans of Beg, Borrow, and Steal. And if you take a look at established games and you think about what are you trying to teach, you can take a look at the mechanics of the game and see if they're going to support the thing that you're trying to teach. So if you want to have kids looking up a lot of references and using more advanced vocabulary, then you might do something that's more D&D-ish, right? But if it's something where they need to be learning math, then that's not useful. So you need to use something that has a lot of mathematical mechanics. And so the other link in the TTRPG book content preview is that matrix, where you can just take a look and it should be pretty easy. And if you have any questions, you can ask us.
I thought I'd just interject for a minute and just build on that idea, if that's okay. I was thinking about Candlekeep and how that works really well, kind of given what you were talking about for like a research skills class, right? Like traditional D&D, there's a whole lot of like looking things up and sorting through information, like going to the index and searching and figuring things out, which is why I think it actually works in that context of how do we teach info literacy skills. But if we think about that in a normal classroom setting, like actually running normal D&D, like you guys were saying earlier, a lot of what D&D asks our players to do is really outside of what our lesson objectives are, right? Like how the system's often built is like a lot of turn-based combat, which is such a time sink and all these little things. And it's like, you've already hit this, but I just wanted to draw that out more and thinking more about, yeah, how are we building the game where it's actually like rehearsing the skill or reinforcing the content in a way.
100%. And also Garrett works with college students, and so getting them up to speed on a game like D&D is going to be incredibly easier than if I'm dealing with 8-year-olds. Right?
Yeah.
There's just so much schema that an 8-year-old does not have about that. So here, I'm going to share my screen really quickly to show you the matrix, because the matrix is pretty easy, we think. So if I'm looking I'm going to write that. If I'm looking for communication, right? And I am looking for a game that has a lot of rules with a focus on collaborative solution that requires a lot of communication between the players to do planning. It might have conversation sentence starters or prompts to support students. It might have really specific safety tools so that if people are uncomfortable, they have a way to express that to each other. And then we also have to ask ourselves what structures are in place in our classroom that we can build upon. Because if we don't have any of those, we got to start there. So for each sort of important thing, social emotional skills and executive functioning skills, as you can see here, and sort of some of the key academic skills, you think about what's your desired outcome, and then you're looking for structural elements within the game, other sort of material or conceptual elements, and then contextual elements, which are things that are already in your classroom, right? And that's what we were talking about with Candlekeep, right? If you're doing a reading comprehension thing, based lesson, then rules written in a format or reading level that's appropriate for your students, things like that. So feel free to take a look at that anytime. This is how we think about games when we are looking at other people's games, to see if they would be useful or any pieces of them would be useful for our classrooms.
One thing that's really key thinking about this tricks, is we have to think about if we're evaluating an existing property, right? For either adaptation to a classroom or direct classroom use, some systems are much easier. We have to think of like, what are the main things that players do as they're playing? Like we can say, like, and we don't need to harp on D&D, it's just the most well-known property out of the bunch.
Right.
But we can say that D&D has opportunities for a lot of conversation and collaboration in that role play element. However, if we look at the bulk of like what the children will spend their time doing, is what players spend their time doing and the mechanics that sort of support that, like, is that what they're going to be lent to, right?
Hmm.
We want the players to have to practice those skills because we want them to gain that understanding. We don't want it to be something like, oh, this has it, versus this is a stated goal of players as they play the game.
Right. And I think right now it wants me to tell me how my streaming experience was. It was fine. All right. So I think to that point, a game that I like to use, that I've adapted for my classroom is called Lighthouse at the End of the World. And it's a solo journaling role-playing game where, to make a long story short, you're sort of in a gothic horror and you're a lighthouse keeper off the coast of Antarctica in South America during the age of sail, and you're in this sort of haunted lighthouse and you're slowly kind of going crazy. And so the mechanics, though, are so simple. You pull 2 or 3 cards. Each card has a prompt on it, but like the King of Hearts has a King of Hearts prompt, and the Ace of Diamonds has an Ace of Diamonds prompt. And you put the 3 prompts together and then write a journal entry about it. That's it. That's the mechanic. And if you're playing it by yourself, you can also use a Jenga tower to represent your sanity and other things like that. But for the classroom, that's it. It's a really simple framework and it sparks so much creativity. And there's very, very little time lost from the writing. They're writing 95% of the time they're playing that game. And that's kind of what we mean when we talk about sort of that laser focus on what am I actually trying to do. And I use this game with 8th graders. There's a bunch of these sort of solo role-playing games about writing, but I use this one specifically with 8th graders because their main genre is gothic horror. We do a big Edgar Allan Poe thing. So this is right in there with what they're already working on. So we are a small, intimate group. So if anybody has questions, you can just feel free to shout them out. Jennifer and I are improv people, and so you're not going to knock us off our train of thought or anything. But I can't actually see anyone when I'm sharing the screen, so I won't know if you have a question unless you say it. Okay? So, let's see. Let me see if I can share my screen again. All right. So Jennifer's gonna take you through a game she made with C.A.T.S, and then I'm gonna take you through a little game that I made with C.A.T.S, and then we want to just kind of help you guys start thinking it through. So we're in the sharing section of the presentation.
We love that. We love sharing. So to give a tiny bit of context, I am a middle school social studies teacher. I teach 7th grade. And the first unit of our year is world religion. And it's a lot for kids sort of jumping in. We don't know each other super great yet. It is the first sort of entree into who I am person, which is very exciting for them, I'm sure. And it's also, as we are kind of still building our class culture, So this game is a bit more rigid as we are building kind of that culture of playing games and collaborating and role play. So the thing that I kind of started with was subject matter because that was just already kind of determined for me. I needed something to teach my religions unit. So that was kind of, I mean, you could say I started with that because it was the thing that I needed to do.
Well, and you've mentioned in other times that we've talked about this, you've mentioned world religions is a kind of a big ask for a bunch of kids who haven't been in class together with a strange teacher, strange them teacher, to have in-depth and respectful conversations about comparative religion is a tough ask in this modern world we live in rural New Hampshire, where pretty much everyone is the same religion, right? And so having this extra ability to sort of take it a little bit out of reality and a little more into a fantasy place allows for more truth and bravery in the discussion.
Yeah, and one of the things that it does is it depersonalizes something that can be very personal for kids. And I don't know if you've ever met a middle schooler, but emotional intimacy is sometimes often fraught with them and can impede some curriculum access. So the reason I turned this into a game is because we are learning about comparing world religions, but like the real skill that they are practicing is gathering evidence from multiple sources to draw a conclusion, right? We are taking a thing that we don't know and corroborating evidence that we have gathered to measure it against things that we do know to kind of figure out what we have. In a way, it's sort of also like a dichotomous key, kind of, where you get a whole bunch of evidence and you're trying to figure out what it is that you're looking. So I wanted my students to practice corroborating evidence and looking at multiple sources, and get them comfortable with not knowing stuff and having to figure it out. So the concept that kind of went around that is I said, okay, I also have to really be careful of like the emotional stakes for some of my students who are part of minority religious communities. We don't want to tokenize any student, nor do we want to, like, I have a very flip, sarcastic personality as a person, like encoded into my DNA. So I also have to be really thoughtful because sometimes my communication style can appear as though I am being flippant, dismissive, when in reality it's just kind of my, I guess, manner of carrying myself. So I thought coming up with something like this, I wanted to put all of the kids on an even playing field and have every student in the position of learner. So I wanted it to be a mix because I didn't want any students to be feel like they were sort of part of a dominant or majority group. So the concept is that students are shipwrecked on a cursed island, and there is a temple at the center of the island that is swirled in clouds, and the island has been cursed by an evil sorceress. That's me. And what the students have to do is there's all these buildings around the temple, and the students have to go visit all of the cursed villagers and gather the evidence that they have to try and put it together to figure out what religion is the temple dedicated to. But all the villagers are cursed and they can't give you the name of the religion or anything specific, and they all only have access to one piece of information. So that was kind of where I was headed, and because this comes early in my year as we're really building into our class norms, I wanted there to be a balance of individual work and collaboration because for students who have a hard time totally sharing, I wanted them to have something where they understood what they were supposed to do, but also push them out of that comfort zone and force them to kind of put all of their stuff together. It's also kind of their first foray into the idea of like a collective shared responsibility in my class. And I wanted the stakes to be low so that they could really practice the skill and not be worrying about doing it right or being perfect. I just wanted them to sort of go through the process of having to work together and collect. Okay, so we're gonna play Curse of the Clouded Temple. This game is in slides because I did not. The last year was the first year that we played it, and I didn't want to go through, like, a lot of it will be printed out and laminated, but when we were still sort of figuring it out, I wanted it to be in something that was easily editable, so it lived in slides for a very long time, which was great because all of my kids could have access to everything. So if we click forward, I set up the fiction. I tend as a tone to take a kind of sarcastic, like intentionally cringe tone with middle schoolers. I find that that builds their engagement and, like, you know, if they feel like they're in on the joke with me, they are very willing to come along. So
100%.
my very hokey kind of story with, like, Google image search images is talking about them being on their annual whale watch and dinner cruise, which is not a thing that our school would ever do, which is what makes it fun. We
Ever do.
forward. They have a storm, so I do give them this sort of like intro to the quest, so that they kind of get into it. But the fiction does not last that long, so they stop moving. They have 3 slides of fiction. We click to the next slide. They have a silly kind of poem from me that is a way to also give the direction that we go more. All right, then this is kind of their battle map, right? And one of the things that we really want to stress when we talk about C.A.T.S, especially as we are nerd-focused people, is that we want to be focused on the skill and the content and the learning and not the fiction. So I limited myself, like the fiction building is those 3 slides, tells them where they are, what they're doing, and then this is what they have to do. And when the kids have this, all of these, I'm pointing at my screen like you can see, all of the buildings on that map are links to different elements in the slide presentation, because one of the other goals, not only are they looking at multiple sources, but I want them to look at multiple different types of media. So the shipyard is geographic data, that's the navigator, and where they learn the country of origin. And they have to corroborate a bunch of different information that is given to them by the navigator to figure out what country on earth the religion came from. The library is videos of stories, sacred stories from each of the religions. It's from the British National Library. It's a lovely set of videos. They're wonderful. And it's where the students have to kind of do a little bit of literary text comprehension and figure out what are the values and lessons that those stories are trying to teach. In the windmill, they learn about daily life. So that's where sort of the religious practice comes into play. Like, we wear head coverings to pray, and we pray 5 times a day, and we are largely vegetarian, et cetera, and so forth. The inn is key figures, main, like, human beings, people, and figures in the religion. And then the town hall is the history of the faith itself. And the students have to engage with different people that they meet there and gather the important information. They have, like, a little investigation that they have to keep track of their evidence in. And then at the end, they have to perform their they have to do a claim, evidence, and reasoning sort of argument using evidence to the sorceress, which is me, and then we all decide whether they get off. And it's very funny because if they don't make it off the island, it's just silly. So they get a little bit of fiction for each of the places that they get to. Again, like, we're limiting that, and just sort of it's a way of them to bridge from task to task. The navigator is going to share them all this stuff. And it's all on scraps of paper.
Oh, and that's it.
Yes, so that I just sort of put one into this presentation because it's quite long.
Yeah.
There's 5 locations and there's 5 locations and each of them has like 4 or 5 slides. This takes the students, the game itself takes them 3 solid class days to play. And then they have to come together with the other people who are on their same island, and they have to collaborate and use all of their evidence. And then they're given some like, oh my gosh, database articles about these different religions that are at a 7th grade reading level, and they have to corroborate the evidence gathered with known sort of expert testimony.
Wow.
And they practice all of those skills, they get off the island. If not, they have to operate the newest addition to the island, which last year they voted would be the cursed Starbucks, and it would talk about food and food culture of the different religions. That would be what they would have to
That's
lock
great.
in, prefer. They really liked it. And I did not. I had a challenging crew last year. It was the first year we played it, and the kids really liked it, and they were motivated to do it because, like, it wasn't like a lot of stand-up teaching for like my students with like attentional issues, like they could go back and look back at stuff and kind of work in their own way and they were still successful. And for my students who like were particularly well versed in one religion or not, like you might not have gotten that. So, yes.
I think one of the things we've learned is just how little the fiction matters. The
Yeah.
fiction has to be there, but they're willing to buy in. And if you ask them, if they're like, how come this and this, and you just say some ridiculous answer, they're like, all right. And a lot of times, when I have a game, if I'm like the sorceress, I'll be like, oh no, the sorceress is doing whatever. And then later I'm in character as the sorceress and I pretend not to know who the other person is. And they buy right into that, even though it's clearly just me in a hat.
Mm-hmm.
They don't care. And I think that's really important because kids are excited to do something a little bit different and are many of them are really able to jump into the fiction even if it's pretty sparse. And those that really are challenged by that, that's okay. They'll do the work anyway.
Right. And a lot of times like students can get bogged down in the rules of the fiction, and if you sort of provide it as like, think of it as bumpers for bumper bowling rather than like a fully 3D rendered Witcher 3 level world.
Right. And a lot of times they'll ask me questions about it and I'm like, and then I just make it up on the spot. So the next little game that we're going to talk about is the oracular fish. It's a specific lesson, and so this lesson is about measuring tools. I have this random standard that I had to do when I had a math in action class, which was sort of like a remedial. Well, I'll explain about the math class, where I had to talk to them about non-standard units of measurement, how you can like use your hand to count how many hands big something is, or you could use a little piece of string, right? So non-standard units of measurement. And this is something that kids either care about or they don't care about. If they think it's funny or like they see the purpose of it, that's great. But the majority of them are like, why can't I just use a ruler? So my specific aim is that I want students to understand non-standard units of measurement because that's the standard. So students need to be able to do standard units of measurement first, because not all of them can, because a lot of these kids don't spend a lot of time measuring things with rulers. And this particular class they were 6th graders that had 3rd through 11th grade math grade levels. They were very distractible, and some of them were really anxious, and some of them were very bossy. So that was kind of who I had in front of me. So this particular class was on a grand quest to save me from a bad guy with a big mustache. And they would often fight the indescribably horrible minions of this guy. And the reason they were indescribably horrible is because someone asked me what they looked like, and I was like, oh, they're indescribably horrible. And so every time they fought them, whoever got in the last blow got to tell us one more detail about them. So by the end of the quarter, we had an idea of what they looked like. So for this, for C.A.T.S, for this specific lesson, they needed to find that they need to learn to use non-standard units and practice teamwork. And they needed to know standard measurement. And so I decided they need to find and work with a wizard. So story is, you know, the wizard can assist you in getting over the unpassable mountains. You can't go over the unpassable mountains by yourself because they're unpassable. So you have to have the wizard teleport you across. When you arrive, he won't come out, and you need the secret door to open the secret code to open the door. And the fish in the pond next to the tower are oracular. They can tell the future. They have wisdom. It can help you if you know how. So the first part of it, oh, and here's the map I made. They were trying to get to the mysterious cauldron of doom. And so they went to see Gandalf Door the wizard. They went to see the oracular fish. And actually talked to him. So all around on the floor were these little fish. So I told you, you don't actually have to be particularly good at art to make a good game. And they were practicing learning how to measure the fish in centimeters and inches, because before we could do non-standard units of measurement, I had to make sure they understood standard units of measurement. And each team had their own color. And over each fish had a letter on it. So once they had measured all the fish, there was a key that said, you know, like pink fish 2 inches. And that had a C on it, so you put the C there. And over time, it made a secret password. And the secret password is diaphanous, is what it said. Because I was like, nobody's gonna guess that. Even if they could guess, it says the secret password is. No 6th grader is guessing diaphanous. So the wizard can send you to his twin. So you open the door, you got in, you've proven you know how to do standard units of measurement. But when you open the door, you find he's been trapped in the tower for so long, he has broken every ruler and yardstick by accident, which is something that happens to all of the rulers and yardsticks in middle school. So this is a very real thing for them. They're not capable of using them without breaking them. So there's no rulers. He can only measure using his body parts. He doesn't use that body part because it's not health class. And you have to tell him how far to teleport you, because if you don't tell him the right amount of eyes or hands or whatever, you will end up in the mountain and then you will be dead. So each child received, we're in groups with different body parts. And so this little girl had eyeballs, and the eyes were, I think like 3 inches big. Oh, and so I can't remember, but she had a certain amount of eyes, and she was trying to figure out how many eyes per foot. And what was great about this is, like, this little guy really struggles with math. And so he got a foot, and the foot was the size of an actual foot. And he thought that was very funny. And that allowed him to sort of get the concepts of non-standard units of measurement, but also it was much simpler than for the, you know, the little girl who had the eye. So actually that it was 8 eyes per square is what we ended up. So that was the more advanced group that didn't go in evenly. Some people had lips, right? And that also was, these were some more advanced mathematicians who could work out how to do it, even if it didn't go directly into 1 foot. And so in the end, you come to me and you say, okay, the wizard, Gandalf, you need to send me, 300 lips away. And we would find out if you lived or died. But no one actually died. So if someone died by accident, it was funny. Way to make them feel the value of non-standard units of measurement, because otherwise, a lot of them would not have cared. And it was also just funny to walk around with a pair of lips. So if you're looking for where to start with a game, these are some very, very tried and true concepts. Kids love to save vulnerable people or a town. They love to defeat villains. They love to defeat natural disasters. They love to avoid their own death and injury. They love to gather pets. They love to pretend to be part of a magic school. But there has to be a chance of failure. One of my classes, I played this with 2 classes last year, or the year before, and one of them never saved me. They ran out of time. And so they didn't save me. And then I sent them all postcards over the summer from the bad guy and me on vacation in Italy. And, and they still to this day will be like, remember how in 5th grade, we didn't save you and you went to Italy with the bad guy? Right. And so it can't be a guaranteed success, or that takes away the urgency. So, main takeaways. Number 1, the most important thing is the laser focus on the content skills. Form follows function. There has to be a reason that the content is taught to these learners in this way. If you've already got a lesson that works super, super well, don't mess with it. Take something that you're not as happy with and use that. The student and player experience must be centered on the skills, as we said, and the stakes have to be high enough that they want to buy in, but low enough so that they can take some risks and make some mistakes. That's why we love that sort of tongue-in-cheek humor, because that works really well for our middle school population. If they know that they might kill the babies of the mouse colony, they take it really seriously. But then if someone actually does kill the babies, there's no actual babies being killed. So it's funny. It's a little embarrassing, but it's funny as well. And then there has to be some sort of assessment so that we know the game is a good curricular tool. So if I go backwards here, this is my assessment. It's how I see what they were thinking. And so even if they don't get the exact answer right, I can see their thinking process and see where they made an error.
How does that work with, sorry.
Yeah, so let's start chatting.
How does that work with regards to the assessments at the end of the unit? Do you do anything special with that, or do you just, are you doing these mini assessments along the way, and then how do you tie that in at the end of the unit?
So it just depends. It depends. So in this case, this standard I could do in just a couple days. And that was sort of the assessment at the end was, did they or did they not die? Were they able to accurately do it? Right, because this isn't something I want to belabor a lot. And I typically do one or the other. If I have a game where they're sort of in the fiction the whole game, there may be a more standard test at the end, if that's something that is called for by the district or something that I need to do. Or I might teach it to them out of fiction and then have the assessment be the game. Do you want to speak to that, Jennifer?
Yeah, so for Curse of the Clouded Temple, I kind of structured it like, for me, it's the final boss battle, and the way to defeat the sorceress is to do effective claim evidence and reasoning. So, it's kind of like your spell, if you want to think about it that way. But I we also have to remember that our students like are used to a certain school looking a certain way. So I will often do what Maryanne does. Either the game itself will be an assessment of something that they have learned outside of the fiction, or the game will be the way for them to gather information, and their assessment will be something that might be a bit more traditional. It also kind of depends on the standard. So for some of our like standards that are more about like drawing conclusions and communicating findings, it is a lot easier for me to do that within fiction. Whereas in like using maps, some of our geography standards, that's a lot easier to do in fiction. So it kind of depends on what specifically I'm assessing and what actually makes sense. For a writing assessment, which is Curse of the Clouded Temple, is that making argument based on evidence, they kind of have to have done some of that writing. So that is what I will take. I do assess for our community and school cultural expectations. I do give some feedback on that. But that's
Yeah, and
our school specific.
And my style is very collaborative. I like to have games where kids are working in teams as much as possible. That being said, I also need to be able to do individual assessment. So sometimes it'll depend to where maybe kids have an assessment of the skill, and once they've done it, they come and they get a puzzle piece. So when everyone has the puzzle piece, then we move on, or something like that, right? But sometimes you just can't do it in fiction, and that's okay. You can say like, or you can be like, you go down the road and you meet the, slope intercept genie. So you like just teach them slope intercept, and then right, and they're like, oh sweet, the slope intercept genie. You're like, yeah, he's really crooked or whatever, right? And they're like, he talks to you like this. And or maybe, I mean, now I'm just making this up, but maybe he starts like this, and you gotta figure out how to get him like this, right? But then you can do something like they're fighting with, right? Like you have to get X amount % on this test to contribute to the or something like that. And it really just kind of depends. And as you're thinking through your curriculum, we're happy to sort of bounce ideas for a more specific situation with you.
Awesome, thank you.
Oh yeah. The dissertation research that I'm doing is based around a little game where it's called Wild Magic Farms, and it's basically you're a rancher who's a conservationist rancher who's trying to raise cryptids and mythical creatures and then send them back out into the world to make a more magical place, right? And to get a breeding pair so that they'll start breeding. You have to read at your reading level and then write a paragraph that meets your IEP goals. And then you know enough about this animal to then have a breeding pair, and then all these things can happen to your farm. And so you can get money for the store by doing math problems. And each math problem that you do correctly and then explain so that we get your metacognition is $1 for the store, and things cost between $2 and $8. And that's really it. That's the whole game. And so in that way, I'll ask them questions. Well, what is your farmer's favorite holiday? And they have to think about it, but it's really right on the edge of what we would call a role-playing game, right? Because it's the role play is very limited. But that also makes it really accessible for kids. Or it might be like, draw a picture of your person and tell us one detail about them as like a warm-up, but that's sort of not the focus. Then they ask me questions like, how do you know that they're all boys and girls? I'm like, you don't, it's magic. They're like, how do they make a baby? And I'm like, well, when a boy jackalope and a girl jackalope love each other very much. Yeah. I'm not gonna, you can go talk about it in health class, right? I'm like, it's magic.
The question I got in your game was, why are we saving phoenixes if they can just reborn out of their own ashes anyways?
Oh, that's so smart. That's really smart. And then, right, and then I was making one, and then I had to be like, one of the creatures is a selkie, which is like a seal woman, and I had to be like, these are not actual humans. We do not breed like creatures that have
Yeah.
like these are animals. These are not. They might look sort of humanoid, but they don't have like language and culture because we don't trap and breed people. That's a no-no. So yeah, it's they like it. They like the idea that they want to be successful, and this gives kids who maybe are non-traditional learners a way. Actually, I think that's a really important point. Some of your non-traditional learners will be incredibly successful here, and some of your traditional learners
Right.
will be incredibly challenged.
Yeah.
We, in a Greek mythology game, we were fighting Python, the big mythical snake by which pythons are named. And some of the kids, like a lot of the sort of non-traditional learners, could get so into it. And then this one little boy gets all A's on everything. I'm like, okay, you're there. Python, he's standing above you. His teeth are dripping venom. What do you do? And he's like, I roll the dice. I'm like, yes, but what are you doing in fiction? And he's like, I hit him for points.
Yeah.
Right. And he's like 20 points.
No.
That's what the dice say. And I'm like, yes. So imagine in your mind, what does it look like? And he's like, it looks like he minus his 20 points.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so I'm like, hey, did you ever play pretend? And he was like, I pretended I was a soccer player. And I'm like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. Because he's a really good soccer player. And then later, finally, he was like, I hit him with the sword. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. Progress.
You did pretend.
Yeah.
It's just really funny. Because that was really, really, really challenging for him.
No, yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of that with the different types of learners. Kind of, it just activated all kinds of different students who you don't normally hear from when you start running with some of this stuff. I was going to mention about the role play aspect and some of the really interesting things that happen when we give students an opportunity to create a character like that. That a lot of times traditional school curriculum doesn't allow for. Like, so in STEM, so like the STEM research we were doing last spring at an area charter school, Biomed Science Academy in Ravenna, we were looking at how can we help broaden participation in STEM fields, which are often just dominated by men in particular. And a lot of this comes back to identity and having kind of role models of people to kind of look for. And so there's just fewer women that they're exposed to who are in STEM. And so this is one of the challenges. And yet a lot of curriculum, a lot of lessons in STEM don't spend a lot of time talking about what is it actually, who are the people who've done a lot of the work in STEM? What is it like to do work in STEM? So there's not a lot of opportunity, like there's a lot of skill rehearsal. We do a lot of solving STEM problems, a lot of mastering STEM content, but there's not a lot of time like, what is it like to be this person? How can we imagine, doing this work? And so that's where role play is really unique. And it poses a unique opportunity, I think. So that's one of the ongoing research projects we want to keep working on is if we give students an opportunity to create this alter ego over the course of a unit or even a year where they keep developing it and they keep scaling up, does that change their intention or interest in some of these STEM fields? So we only did it for 6 weeks and we saw some interest there, but we didn't have enough time to really see the needle move a ton. But yeah, the biggest thing we got out of that was students overwhelmingly would just love the the tabletop RPG thing. They're just like more. So we're gonna go back and do more. And I think a little more time we're gonna see that needle move. But and it just had me thinking about that application when you mentioned, how much time do we give to these characters? And it also makes me think about my favorite problems. I was awful at math. That was my weakest skill area. But the problems where I kind of came alive were the story problems at the end of the unit. And it was like
getting to Topeka first.
yes. And it's like one way I think about this, or one way we can talk about it to people who are new to it is take those story problems and expand them over the entire unit. Make it a sequence of kind of scaffolded problems, and then give students an opportunity to create a character they're train conductors, they're engineers, they're passengers, they're, whatever, infrastructure people, and they need to keep working on these problems. And so we've got assessment baked in as they solve those problems sequentially. And then, yeah, they're gonna get into hopefully it's not just Railroad Tycoon, which might do it for some kids. Maybe you put it in a little bit of a different setting where there's some intrigue and so forth. But
I think if we're looking at things from a CATS perspective too, what you're describing is one of the main purposes of your research with this group was to try to change their perception or their schema, right? And so that, in that case, you really want to lean into something like that role play. And in something like Wild Magic Farms, my main purpose is I must have them practice skills.
right.
And so all the rest of it is sort of gravy, right? And so again, I think it just comes back to really, before you make a game, really thinking about it and being like, what do I actually want kids to know and be able to do? What are my big values for this academically, and then also, with executive functioning and with communication skills. The Greek mythology game has a lot of cards. And if you lose these cards, some of them you win, they're like loot drops, but some of them are gifts from the gods themselves when they take you on as their patron god. And when you lose them, you don't get another one. Because if you even ask Ares for another sword, he's going to kill you, right? Like, you can't be like, oh, sorry, Poseidon, I lost your trident. Like, I'm like, oh, sucks to be you. I don't know what to tell you. Right? And so that was on purpose because I want them to have to practice materials management.
Yep.
In that case, whereas in a different game, I don't do that because that's not something I want to practice at that time. And we would get lost in the weeds of materials management if we did it that way. So, and it's also trial and error.
Absolutely.
Like, try stuff out.
I always think
Go ahead,
about
Jennifer.
when I'm designing something, I think about like imagining my students' thinking time while they play as a pie chart. And what is the thing that I want the majority of that thinking time to be focused on? So like I'm a girl who loves the fiction, right? I think an extended analogy, I like that is a very comfortable place for me. And one of the things that I really had to think about a lot when I was designing was what do I want the children to be focusing on at that moment? So we have another game that is related to trans-Saharan trade routes and Musa and the sort of great kingdoms of West Africa. And that is a little bit heavier on the role play because I want the children to be thinking specifically about how trade encourages both competition and collaboration, and how you have to have a balance of both in order for your society to sustain. So there is a lot more role play in that, whereas Curse of the Clouded Temple, I don't want the children to be thinking too much about the Curse of Starbucks because they'll come out with a menu and 15 recipes and they'll design a logo and they will not have been.
Right, and somebody
What
else will
was
make
the
a
first
curse
thing?
Dunkin' Donuts, and then we're fighting over
Right.
Dunkin' Donuts. And then somebody brings up Taylor Swift, and everybody's like fighting about if Taylor Swift sucks or not. And you're like, what? Okay.
Yeah. No audience too. Like I have had groups of students where if I wanted, like last year, I had a group of students where we did not have a culture of role play that developed in class in time. And so I had to make in the moment sort of judgment calls of we are going to lose the curriculum piece, we're gonna lose the skill development if I root them too heavily into fiction right now. And so giving yourself permission to think about that as a teacher is fine. Like what when we think about what are we really doing here, right? Is we're taking the internal motivation structures inherent in gameplay. We are taking the reduction in stakes, taking it out of I'm a developing vested teenager in an actual classroom to like I'm a kid who on a cursed fake island, and guess what? As soon as I shut down my Chromebook, all of it's over. Like, that's really what we're doing here to reduce those barriers to students accessing our curriculum. And really, it's an accessibility feature for multiple different types of brains. If our kids don't go full in on like, memorizing every element of the Curse of Strahd in the first time, it does not mean that we have failed. Like, getting a 12-year-old to think of anyone ever other than themselves,
Mm.
just a half a second is already a significant shift in terms of where they are developmental.
Yeah, and it's hard to understate, and I know we're over time, and this has been, you guys, this was incredible. Um, Thank you so much. I'm gonna do another soundboard golf clap.
We love co-think with each other and with you. We love to co-think this kind of stuff. We're both out loud processors, and we love to chat about this. So I'm Calliope. I'm here. That's IC historian, and if you're watching this live or you're watching this later, feel free to shoot us messages, and we'll just find a time to think it through with you. Because the most fun part that there is.
Yes. Feel free to contact, shoot a message. Truly, we will talk shop with literally anyone for forever.
Yeah. Garrett's seen it in action. Yeah. So thank you for coming and being here, and I hope you get some use out of this. I would really, really love to see what you make. So, and what you're thinking about. Because it's been something that's really been helpful and interesting for us in our careers. And I think that's it. So go correct some papers. And then go to bed.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for tuning in. Bye.